If you are thinking of buying property in Portugal in the next 6 to 24 months, here's a question worth asking yourself. Are you buying a lifestyle or a liability? Because many foreign buyers, people with perfectly good judgment in business, still end up with underperforming assets here. Not because they chose the wrong location, but because they misunderstood what they were really buying. And the surprising part, most of these mistakes happen before you even sign a contract. Sometimes before you even step on a plane. Most buyers focus on what's visible. The pool, the view, the finishes. Yet in my experience, the costliest mistakes aren't visible at all. They are hidden in the structure, the environment, and the financial framework. And overlooking these is what quietly turns even a €1 million property into something that underperforms over time. Here's something I often ask clients. When evaluating a property, do you prioritize how it feels or how it will perform over the next 10 years? What tends to happen is this. A serious buyer arrives in the Algarve, experiences the light, the coastline, the atmosphere, and then, quite naturally, starts making decisions at speed. At first, everything appears aligned. Good area, fair price, attractive projections. But 3, 5, 10 years later, the numbers and the lived experience tell a different story. Unexpected works, higher running costs than anticipated, seasonal voids that were never fully modeled. None of these are dramatic on their own, but over time, they quietly pull a good investment off course. My name is João Capella. I'm based in Vilamoura and I work with international buyers acquiring property in Vilamoura, Quarteira, Quinta do Lago and Vale do Lobo. Before real estate, I spent 35 years as a mechanical engineer. And engineering teaches you to think in systems and consequences. How small overlooked details compound over time. That's exactly how I approach property here. Not just as a home, but as a long-term financial and lifestyle system. If you are anything like the clients I work with, you are not afraid of investing. You are simply not interested in avoidable risk. So in this video, we'll walk through 7 costly mistakes that sophisticated buyers often make. Not obvious mistakes, but subtle ones. The kind that don't show up immediately, but make a significant difference over time. As you go through these, you may notice 1 or 2 areas where your current thinking could be refined. And that alone can change the quality of your decision. Most buyers focus on the finishes, the kitchen, the pool, the view. That's natural. It's immediate, tangible. But a property is a system. Structure, materials, orientation, drainage, even the way sunlight moves through the property across seasons. These elements interact over time. And when something is slightly misaligned, the effects are rarely immediate, but they compound. I remember a villa where on the surface, everything was exactly what the buyer wanted. Location was strong, finishes were excellent. The property showed very well. But when looking closely at the structure and drainage, there were small inconsistencies, nothing dramatic, but enough to raise questions. Another owner of a similar property later experienced water management issues after heavy rainfall, requiring corrective work. Not catastrophic, but entirely avoidable with the right scrutiny up front. You might see higher energy costs, accelerated wear, or maintenance issues that seem minor individually, but add up significantly over time. I've seen properties that looked flawless on day one, yet within a relatively short period, underlying issues required substantial intervention. Not because the property was bad, but because it was never evaluated as a system. When you look at the property, are you seeing what's visible or what will perform over time? New builds create confidence. Modern finishes, clean lines, a sense of simplicity. But new doesn't necessarily mean optimized for longevity. Construction quality, insulation, orientation, and execution tolerances. These are rarely obvious at first glance. A property can look impeccable and still carry inefficiencies that only reveal themselves through use. For example, orientation alone can significantly affect comfort and cost. A south-facing facade may increase cooling demand. Material choices can influence long-term wear. These are not dramatic flaws, but they are cumulative. I've seen relatively new properties where, within a few years, owners were already dealing with higher than expected costs and performance gaps. Even new builds require analytical scrutiny. When you evaluate something, are you assessing how it looks today or how it behaves over time? In coastal areas like the Algarve, the environment plays a very specific role. Salt air, wind, sun intensity. These aren't just lifestyle features, they are mechanical forces. They affect facades, metal components, pools, gardens, and exterior structures. Over time, they influence maintenance cycles and cost. What often happens is that buyers appreciate the location, but underestimate the long-term interaction between property and environment. A seafront property may appear low maintenance, but over several years, exposure can lead to corrosion, repainting, material degradation, and higher upkeep. This isn't a negative, it's simply a reality that needs to be factored in. When you evaluate a property, how much attention do you give to the environment it operates within? For apartments and managed developments, the condominium structure is a central part of the investment. Amenities are visible: pools, gyms, landscaping, but the financial structure behind them is what determines long-term exposure. Reserve funds, planned works, management quality, these are not always reviewed in detail, yet they directly affect future costs. I worked with a client who was close to purchasing an apartment in what appeared to be a very well-maintained development. Visually, everything aligned. Clean common areas, good amenities, strong location. But when we reviewed the condominium documentation in detail, it became clear that the reserve fund was relatively low, and there were discussions around upcoming structural works. At that point, the property itself hadn't changed, but the financial picture had. The buyer decided to step back and reassess, and interestingly, the next option we looked at, slightly less visually impressive, but had a much stronger financial structure. That shift in perspective often changes the decision entirely. A property may appear well priced, But if the underlying structure requires significant future contributions, the real cost becomes something quite different. Sophisticated buyers tend to look beyond the apartment itself. They review documentation, understanding upcoming works, and assess how the building is managed over time. Do you focus more on what the building offers or how it is actually run? Some properties are relatively easy to buy, but more complex to sell. Liquidity is rarely discussed at the beginning, but becomes very relevant later. Highly personalized layouts, very specific architectural styles, or niche positioning. These can narrow the future buyer pool. That doesn't make the property wrong, but it does influence flexibility. If circumstances change, or if you choose to exit, the time required and the pricing flexibility needed may differ from expectations. In more standardized properties, demand tends to be broader. In more unique properties, demand can be deeper but narrower. If you needed to sell the property in the future, how broad would the buyer pool be? This is often one of the most subtle and most costly mismatches. A property can be fundamentally sound, well located, and objectively a good asset, but misaligned with your intended time frame. Markets move in cycles. Certain areas mature over longer periods. If your horizon is shorter than the asset's natural cycle, the outcome can feel disappointing, even if the asset itself is strong. This is not a property problem, it's a timing alignment issue. I remember a buyer who acquired a property with very solid long-term fundamentals. A good location, strong underlying demand drivers, and clear potential over time. But his personal plan was to exit within 3 to 4 years. The market simply hadn't had time to fully reflect properly on the property's potential. So when he evaluated the outcome, it felt overwhelming. Not because the asset was wrong, but because the time frame and the asset were not aligned. That's a subtle distinction, but it makes a significant difference in how an investment is experienced. How well does this property align with your actual timeline, not an assumed one? Finally, many buyers never clearly define the role of the property. Is it a lifestyle asset, an income generator, a long-term store of value? Without that clarity, decisions become reactive. You may optimize for aesthetics when yield matters, or prioritize rental potential when personal use is the real goal. And that internal misalignment creates friction over time. It can also lead to inconsistent decisions, changing strategies midway, or reacting to short-term conditions instead of following a clear plan. What role should this property play in your life or in your portfolio? If you step back, if you'll notice a pattern, these mistakes are really dramatic. They are subtle, but they compound financially, practically, and emotionally over time. They tend to cluster around 7 areas: evaluating surface instead of system, assuming new means reliable, underestimating environmental exposure, ignoring condominium financial structure, misjudging liquidity, misaligning with your timeline, and not clearly defining the property's role. If you are considering buying in Vilamoura, Quarteira, Quinta do Lago or Vale do Lobo in the next 6 to 24 months, clarity on these points before you move forward can save you a significant amount of money, and just as importantly, time and energy. On this channel, the focus is simple: helping international buyers think clearly about property in the Algarve, beyond appearances, beyond marketing, and beyond assumptions from other markets. If this way of looking at things resonates with you, you may find it useful to follow the channel and explore the next videos. In the next video, we'll go deeper into how to evaluate a property as a system, so you can quickly determine whether it truly serves your objectives or not. And if you'd like a complete overview of the full buying process, I've linked that here. And I'm genuinely curious, which of these 7 areas do you feel most confident about, and which might need more attention in your own plan? If you'd like to share your thoughts in the comments, I do read them and often use them to guide future videos.